Hey, I'm Ben Hufana. Today I'm with Dan. And Dan showed up in one of my classes. When did you show up? How long ago was that?
I want to say around June or July of 2018.
Okay. And Dan was telling me about the whole getting to class itself was kind of a challenge. I mean, he almost went home that night. One of the challenges with using Meetup is that people sign up for things and then they don't show up. And I feel sad for a lot of these people because I know they have like really significant issues. I mean, some people have gone through a breakup or divorce, they're heartbroken. And what I find is the vast majority of people really do not possess the resources that are going to enable them to fully process or digest that experience. And therefore, they're not going to be able to heal the subsequent emotional wounds. And yeah, many people never fully heal the loss of a love. I see people like, 6 months, a year, 5 or more years, and they still carry those wounds. And it's not just breakup or divorce. I mean, people are coming to my class with all kinds of major issues that, something says, oh yeah, I need to deal with this, but then when it comes to actually taking the steps, a lot of people short circuit or derail their own healing process. But I want to hear what you have to say, because you were like right on that edge, right on the fence there. So what happened?
Yeah, so I had been going through several months. This was an accumulation of events, but several months I had been experiencing a lot of anxiety, depression. I was having trouble just even, functioning on the train without feeling a lot of anxiety and emotion. And so it felt very crippling and exhausting. But I had found his class on meetup.com, and it talked about awakening the healing potential, the healing power within you, opening up to love, building relationships, a lot of wonderful things. And I thought, okay, I could try this, let's give it a go. The night of, I left work and I was exhausted, and I have a habit of saying I'll do something sometimes and then not following through when it comes to events on meetup.com or just things that seem very non-committal. And I was walking to the train to go home and I couldn't bring myself to go further. I was by the doors and I couldn't get on. So I turned around. I knew something within me was like, you need to just go check it out. You need to go see what it's about. And I showed up. And at first it was really interesting because it was Ben alone in a room and all this circle of chairs, and I felt very intimidated by it. And even then, at every step of the way, I was resisting.
I could feel it too.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. I'm open to trying new things, but I'm also very skeptical and critical of those things, and the validity in those experiences. I'm always questioning that. So for me, it's hard to bring myself to be there every step of the way. But I did, and for whatever reason, I needed it.
Now you were sitting in class, and I was taking you through these practices while you were and I think that night was just one other person who showed up. And what was happening as you were doing the practices?
We were breathing into our stomachs, and as you mentioned, there's a big disconnect in the upper part of our body to the lower part, and a lot accumulates down there. So we were breathing into our stomachs. We were trying to sense movement, see if we felt anything from just bringing our presence into this area. I felt like I was getting more relaxed. and I was experiencing some warmth and movement. Going into that, it's hard to, once you start to recognize it, it's hard to really get in there if you haven't really been doing that. But for me, it was very relaxing and healing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's the practices I take people through in class will vary tremendously. And you were just in one class, actually, but if in different classes, lots of people with all kinds of different kinds of issues will show up. And so I have to sense into each individual, like, what is this person's needs? What are your concerns in this other person here and there and so on. And so it will vary tremendously according to who's showing up. But it's one of the specific practices I take people down into the abdomen. And what happens is we live in a society where we're so much up in our heads. We can be very resistant to our own emotional responses to the events, our experiences that occur within our lives. And so as we shut down emotionally, that tends to disconnect or to some extent dissociate us from our physical bodies. Now, a lot of the emotion is situated in the chest. That's where we primarily experience the majority of our emotions. But then you go further down into the body, like into the abdomen. And this is more like the foundation in terms of how we root into our bodies. And there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on the heart, in terms of any kind of spiritual development and being more compassionate or so on. But actually the deepest empathy comes from the abdominal region, because if we just have the heart open and we're disconnected down here in the abdominal region, then we might have somewhat of a loving presence or care for somebody to some extent, and yet we're lacking that deep empathetic connection to other people, other beings. You see all the animals that are abandoned, that are in shelters being euthanized. I mean, it's just horrendous, a lot of the suffering in this world, and so much of it is because we have this huge disconnect, and therefore we lack empathy. Another example is the way we're destroying the planet, and so much of the cruelty, the suffering, the destruction is a reflection of what's happening within ourselves. So much of the emphasis of my work is on getting you into the body, really processing your own emotions, healing the deep emotional wounds. And by doing so, you can be more empathetic, more compassionate, more responsible human being. Now, at the end of class, you were, I think you were like, okay, that was good, I'm headed home, but...
At every moment I was ready to just be like, this is enough, or, I'm ready to go. And that wasn't because I didn't want to be there, it was just because I felt like this was a good point that I got to. I got what I wanted out of it. Mm-hmm. But, that wasn't true. The idea that there was more wasn't known to me. I didn't know that, working with Ben would deepen my idea of what it means to, grow in that spirituality and in that healing.
Yeah. So when I first, you were about to take off, and I said, it'll just take me 10 minutes. I can look through your aura real quick. And so I did. And I was seeing that, you impressed me as being very intelligent, very capable, but at the same time there's a certain foundation that was missing. And like you were really struggling emotionally at that time. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. You mentioned that I had been very disconnected, very closed off. There was a lack of presence was the key key phrase. And I guess, for a long time I hadn't allowed myself to process emotion. There's always this trope in society about males especially, having to be not as emotional, more put together. And I kind of fit that in a way, because I wouldn't let myself feel. And the way I was processing emotions wasn't healthy. It's not that I was all over the place, it was that I wasn't even allowing myself to feel those sensations and feelings. When I was feeling sad, I wouldn't let myself feel sad. I was like, it's okay, push it aside, forget about it.
Yeah, and a big part of it is because we're never really taught how to work constructively with our own emotional responses. And so the fact that, being that we don't work with our emotions, we have all kinds of events or challenging situations that we deal with, and they elicit strong, sometimes very painful emotional responses. And if we don't understand our emotions and have no idea how to work with them, we end up suppressing our own emotional responses to what's taking place in our life. And the unfortunate consequence of doing so is it creates more of a disconnect, but it also stunts our development. Our emotions, say whatever experience we go through, if we're struggling in a professional sense, like we're running into certain obstacles or challenges, and we don't possess all the resources or faculties we need to advance or to excel or to perform our duties within a professional sense. And so if it's triggering anxiety or fear, if at times when what we're doing doesn't work out as well as we want it to, we're not succeeding at what we're attempting to accomplish, then there can be a profound sense of failure or feelings of incompetence or inferiority, any number of things. And if we can't process emotionally, and especially if we self-medicate, if we let ourselves get distracted, then that's going to make it harder for us to learn, to adapt. But the more that we can actually work constructively with our own emotional responses, then that facilitates this, it actually engages this innate healing and intelligence that resides within our own body and mind. And you see how children just move readily from one stage to the next, to the next, to the next, in their process of growth and development. And so when we learn to work constructively with our emotions, it actually engages this innate healing intelligence residing therein, and that helps us to move along this developmental progression where we develop greater competency, we expand our range of motion. And so there's this building of a greater foundation. Now, one of the things that, we won't go too in depth on it, but let's say there's a little substance use.
So there was a period where with weed, I haven't done anything more than that, but just smoking definitely is a certain way to, whether you realize it or not, numb or dissociate from those emotions and that content that you're carrying around. Even drinking, it really all depends on how you use it and what your attention is in the moment. But I think a lot of the time that those substances, alcohol and weed, don't allow you to process your content properly.
Definitely.
Once in a while, I don't think it's a horrible thing to indulge in something like that once in a while, but if you're doing it over an extended period of time, you will dissociate.
Where it becomes a habitual pattern of self-medicating.
Yeah, whether you realize it or not, it's happening.
And as I began to look in your aura, is like, again, I could see that, you know, you were very intelligent, you possessed a tremendous amount of sensitivity, but there were like certain, part of the foundation hadn't really developed to the extent it needed to. And you were describing, you said you felt anxious and overwhelmed. And I could see that. And I knew that, say, if we had the opportunity to work together, that it would facilitate the processing instead of being so anxious and overwhelmed. Like, how have we been different? Like, as we begin to work, I've noticed that, and you've described it, like you're, in terms of professionally, that you've been more resilient, more comfortable, you've been like, definitely you're functioning at a higher level than you were before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you describe the changes or differences?
Yeah. I think, you know, it's definitely multi-layered, but where I was before, it was very disorienting, and I didn't realize how far I'd gotten as far as disconnecting in that way and not processing things. So, you know, working with you to develop that, I feel like more confident. You know, if I'm in a situation where I'm getting stressed out, I have more of the tools to work with that. Mm-hmm. And just feeling more put together, a bit like Humpty Dumpty, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So in many respects, again, you're more highly functional, you're more resourceful, and
yeah.
What's the difference now in terms of like how you're dealing with your emotions now at this point in time as opposed to before?
I think before I wasn't, even though I may have thought I was, I definitely wasn't as aware of how I was processing it. Now when I am experiencing a really intense emotion, or I know that I need to work on something, I won't push it aside. I'll recognize it, I'll feel it, I'll breathe into it, and I'll let myself kind of indulge in that emotion or that sensation.
What does that give you that you didn't have before? Say, at this point you're actually working with the emotions, and you know, here's what you were doing before, and there were certain limits to your functioning, and now that you're processing, doing this deep level processing, how is your life different?
I'm absolutely more confident. I'm more able to come back from my lows. If I'm in a state of anxiety or sadness, which, you know, it's just part of the human condition, I'm able to kind of rebound off of that pretty quickly. And I think it's twofold in the sense that you have the ability to work on this, and you have some of the tools, but you know, working with Ben has kind of afforded me like a new set of skills or a new way to process things. So when I do decide to work on myself and unwinding these knots, I have the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel different in terms of like just being in your body and both being more present in your body, and also just before the emotions were more overwhelming, but what is your experience of when you are, you know, because it's just normal, we're human beings, there are going to be situations, experiences that really trigger us deeply. You know, as we all experience losses along the way, there's all kinds of challenges, pressures, demands in our work. So what happens now when you're really triggered? Maybe we've already asked that, but it's more in depth.
I'll do maybe some of the practice that you taught me. Mm-hmm. I'll take a second and I'll start breathing into maybe a sensation. If I have a strong sensation in my body, that's a result of this an emotional response. I'll try to breathe into it, and not necessarily to push it away, but to bring it to the surface to process it, to digest it. And that's really important because it affords me the chance in the moment to not just like put something in a really cluttered closet and come back to it later. It allows me to kind of deal with it then and there.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So how's the difference? Like, you were in one of my classes, but then, and one of the frustrating things about, for me, just teaching classes is because people show up, and I could, in so many instances, I could see how deeply wounded they are. And most people, to varying degrees. You know, some get by pretty well, function pretty well, but a large percentage of the population is carrying some very substantial emotional wounds that, and whatever physiological health issues in addition, that they're not being adequately addressed. I mean, psychotherapy can be an important part of the healing process. We need that cognitive understanding, but I've seen people spend years, decades in psychotherapy, and they have that intellectual understanding of what's not working in their lives and their own woundedness, but it doesn't go too far beyond that. Maybe there's some degree of emotional processing, but in many respects they're still very much locked within that context. And so when you came to class, and especially when I was looking in your aura afterwards, and I was looking in the subtle bodies, you know, and I could see like a lot of there's all this emotion that was held in your body, a lot of strong emotion, and I could see that you really didn't have all the resources or faculties you needed to fully process or digest that on your own, and that there was that overwhelm. Again, the substance use, man, that had some impact in terms of it kind of limits or stunts or impedes the development of the faculties we need to do that deep level processing. And plus, anytime we self-medicate, it inhibits the processing at that time. And so whatever it is we're going through, whatever stress, whatever upset, those emotions, we further disconnect from them and they don't process, and so there's this backlog that's accumulating. And so we get more overwhelmed with what it is that we're not processing, the realities of our daily lives. We're just not coping as well, and so there's this backup, all this content backing up that we're not dealing with, and so there's more of a backlog on one hand, and then the actual faculties, the resources, the hardware or circuitry that is needed to facilitate the digestion of our life experiences and our subsequent emotional responses. It's like that hardware is not really developing. It's not functioning, or developing, or both. and so it means there's a limited coping capacity or processing. And so I knew, say, like some people just show up in class a time, it's like, wow, that was amazing, and then they just disappear, and I just feel sad for a lot of these people because I know that they really don't have all the resources they need in terms of doing the deep level processing of their emotions, healing their own emotional wounds, and developing the foundation that they need to be fully functional, to truly realize their purpose in this life, you know, to have a clear sense of purpose and to fulfill their potential. Like they're not playing with the full deck. They don't have all the resources they need. Being that I've trained from a traditional Native American doctor, like our training involves going out alone into the mountains to fast for 4 days and nights without food and water. And October was my 52nd time, and like every time I go, it's like it's taking me another step, you know, forward, big step forward in terms of, like, I'll be doing dealing with my own woundedness, you know, just things that carry over from my childhood, adolescence, things that have happened along the way in my relationships. And each time there are a lot of different challenges I face in my own life, and we all have a certain amount of resources that determine how we're able to cope, how effective we are in different areas of our life. And so I can feel when I'm coming up against a wall. I have these really substantial challenges to deal with, and I feel when I'm hitting the wall there. So I go on the next vision quest, and every time I do, I find that I'm that much more capable. I'm breaking through those walls, those limitations. And so I'm more highly functional. I'm better able to do whatever it is I need to do. And it's just all areas of my life. And so I know as we start working together, I could see that you're more resilient, you're functioning better in different areas. You were telling me a while ago that more people are noticing you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so as we become more present within our bodies, we become more attractive. More people are drawn to us because they start to pick up that we have something on some level that they need. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share in terms of different areas that you're seeing change or growth?
I think I'm more focused on seeking things that align with my highest self. Things that really align with what I want to do for a career. I may not be there in knowing what I want to do, but pushing myself and attracting those things as well into my life. It comes a little bit more easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much a process, and even for me, for instance, it's like I had, as an adolescent, I knew that I wanted to train from one of the native doctors, but it was just kind of like this very nebulous vision, and sometimes we have an idea what we think it'll look like, and yet that's not necessarily grounded in reality. And yet, with all the practice and then continuing to go on the vision quest, there's this continual, moving further into that. And having trained with both a master from China and the traditional Native American doctor, that's training in two different lineages, training from two different individuals who have attained mastery to a very high level of that. And that's been my inspiration to and gaining that understanding that as I keep taking the steps, I'm going to come into greater and greater levels of mastery. And that's every person I work with. There's a similar thing that as they continue to do the practice and with each subsequent session they do, there's this continual building and development. So I was saying a while ago that many people come to my classes, and I recognize that they have very limited resources, in terms of, I can see how wounded people are in many respects, that a lot of the difficulties, the challenges that they're experiencing in their life, for instance, a lot of people say they've gone through a breakup or a divorce, and they haven't really processed that, and most likely they're not going to. The weeks, the months will pass by, and because they don't really work with their emotions all that well, and they'll get distracted from, say, all the time they're spending online, all the demands of work, not getting enough sleep, whatever, all the running around, going on those dating apps and swiping, and it just overwhelms people, and so people don't process. And in fact, that There are people who show up once or twice, they'll disappear. They won't do any individual work, and I know they do not possess the resources or faculties they need to do the deep level processing. Therefore, what will happen is they'll go through those experiences, they won't process them, and they're going to continue to hold a lot of those deep emotional wounds, and that's going to have an adverse impact on them in terms of like their ability to open up and be present, and to have that capacity to love and to be loved by another. And that's just one area. I mean, there are so many different areas of life where we're facing different challenges. Native Americans, they would, not all Native people, but I mean, having trained with a traditional doctor and speaking with others who follow these traditions, is that they would say that not all of us comes into the body. Like we don't all fully incarnate. And also training with this master from China, it's amazed me that his English isn't all that good, but when he's able to share with me at times in whatever broken English, whatever Google Translate or dictionary or whatever, he gets the message across that within the Taoist traditions there are a lot of similarities. And they would also say things to the effect of that we don't fully incarnate into the body. A lot of the resources that we need, it's like they're saying that not all of us is here. And so within these traditions, there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on doing practice, making use of various interventions to become more fully present too. And in doing so, it's like, from their standpoint, it's actually bringing more of the soul into the body. You see that yin-yang symbol, for instance, and part of that symbolizes, like, there's the aspect of ourself that's of the earth, and there's another aspect of the heavens, and that heavenly aspect is more like our soul. And so there's that combining of the two elements, the heavens and earth, and there's this continual building so that we become more, so that there's this growing evolution that takes place of the earthly part of self, the heavenly or the soul. And I'm not religious. I mean, for me, this is more from a humanistic or developmental standpoint, is how I look at things. I think we're both very skeptical. We tend to be very pragmatic in our approaches to things. We don't just believe things. It's like everything has to have some kind of practical application to it. But again, you experience one thing in classes, or the class that you came to, and there's a limit to what I can do in classes, but in terms of the individual work, I can hear the neighbors. We're in New York City, so it's finding a quiet place is a miracle, and the neighbors just arrived at home, but upstairs, kids running all over the place and barking dogs. But
let's hear that. There's that.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a thing for the next hour.
Yeah, but how would you describe what you experienced in the individual sessions?
So the individual sessions, you open with meditating for about an hour and a half, and then you lie down on the table, and he channels a presence to work through breaking down the blockages and rebuilding your
that foundation.
That foundation, yeah. Mm-hmm. That energy system that you have. For me, the first session we did was amazing. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't expecting really anything. I didn't even know that I was going to be lying down on the table and doing that part of it. I thought we were just going to meditate and still work through it in that way. But
the traditional Native American doctors and other indigenous healers all worked as conduits, in that they allowed other forces or beings to work through them to facilitate healing that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Like in this culture, for instance, there's within more recent years, I don't know, 20 years. So you have all what they call energy work. There's all these people going to classes, getting these certifications, and where they're supposedly, say, 3 weekend workshops, and they're calling themselves masters, and they're supposedly they're master healers, and it's bullshit. It's among Native Americans, for instance, which I'm not going to say this is the only way, but this, for example, there's a very arduous process that one goes through in order to become a healer, and it's serious business, because people's lives are dependent upon these doctors. And I do know of instances where people claim to possess gifts or powers that they really didn't have, and someone with serious medical health issues went seeking healing and didn't get it, and in some instances did not survive. But traditionally, one would apprentice with one of the old native doctors towards the end of his or her life. And these old native traditional doctors would pass on a portion or all of that medicine or that power they carried to the younger apprentice. And then in order to work with that gift, you couldn't just take the ball and run with it. You actually had to earn the right to work with that gift of healing. And so you had to go through what's known as the Vision Quest, where we go out alone into the mountains to fast for the 4 days and nights without food and water. And in going through the Vision Quest, you would earn the right to work with this power, this gift of healing. And so again, those of us who work on this level, we act as conduits to allow a greater force or presence to work on behalf of the individuals that we are assisting. And so as I'm working with people, what happens is I go into a very deep state. I allow this presence to work through me. Some people actually feel a sensation of hands going into the body doing reconstructive work. Say I'm working with people with digestive issues, or maybe they've been injured in an automobile accident. And so this presence is going in and actually doing reparative work within the physical body. And I've seen dramatic examples of this, say like someone who's suffering from ulcerative colitis and passing blood in his stools and in a lot of pain, and in 5 or 6 sessions, guy's okay. I mean, he's no longer in pain, no longer passing blood in his stools, and he's eating pretty much what he wants. Or another individual who was in an automobile accident going through an intersection, was hit broadside, and the impact was so great the seatbelt snapped, and he flew out of his Jeep spinning in the air and landed on the pavement, had these huge road rashes along the right side of his on his right side, his leg, and enormous pain. He said physical therapy was like torture for him. And the first session, he's like up and back to work doing construction. So we'll see changes like this. But with Dan and with many people I'm working with, are not dealing with any kind of medical emergency. And the fact that the vast majority of people, again, majority of us have not learned how to work constructively with our emotions, and we've gone through all kinds of things that have happened. There's the wounding that we experienced from childhood. Often, say, if we grew up with parents that are not that emotionally available, we may have been abandoned by either one or both parents. Many of us have suffered emotional, physical, even childhood sexual trauma, and we did not possess the resources needed to really process those experiences, to heal those deep emotional wounds, and just the drama that's playing out in many of our love lives, the fact that people are so wounded, so disconnected in many respects, and it's a basic human need to have somebody in our lives that we can love and be loved by, and we put ourselves out there, and just the fact that many people are just in a place where they're not really capable of being present, and they're so ambiguous in terms of what it is they want. They don't know. And so we get all these mixed messages, and then we have experiences like being ghosted or just whatever, and all that ambiguity, and so we're left hurt and devastated at times, and we just don't. Often we don't process that heartbreak. We don't heal that woundedness, and so. That's where this work comes in. This is where this work is valuable. And for me too, that's why I relied so heavily on the Vision Quest, because we all go through a lot in our lives. And there's a certain amount of healing that we can do on our own. That's part of the reason I teach the practices I teach in class. But at a certain point, we also need the interventions. There's a certain point at which we've come to the limitations of what we're capable of doing for ourselves. That's why I rely so heavily upon the Vision Quest for myself. And then the work that I do individually. Part of the beauty of this work is that it is able to come in at that point at which you've reached your own limitations in terms of enabling you to heal your own emotional wounds and to build a stronger foundation and to get to more where you need to be in terms of like your own growth, your own development, where you need to be in your own life. Anything you want to add in before we wrap up here?
I would say that, working with Ben has been really profound, and I don't know where I would be if I hadn't gone to that group session that first night. So I feel very lucky to have come this far, and I'm excited to keep pushing forward and keep developing.
Sounds good. We'll leave you with that for now.